Pseudoscience, a collection of beliefs, theories, and practices that claim to be scientific but lack the evidence and methodology of legitimate scientific theories. We're going to explore the Pseudosciences Iceberg. The most well-known theories are at the surface layers, with entries getting more and more obscure the deeper we go. All of these entries are rejected by science and are presented as such, so strap in, as this is going to be a pretty long one. We've all seen the videos of satisfying cracks and pops, but are chiropractors actual doctors, and is chiropractic an actual science? Chiropractic can definitely help with pain release, but many chiropractors claim that they can cure sleeping and feeding problems in children, ear infections, asthma, and many other things. In reality though, there is no scientific basis for these claims. There are two main types of acupuncture. One is medically accepted and is practiced by doctors and physiotherapists, both of whom are trained in Western medicine. Needles are placed in the muscles, nerves, and connective tissues in order to stimulate them and release pain. The other type is traditional acupuncture, which is rooted in ancient Chinese medicine. It's based on qi and the meridians, which are pathways through which this energy flows through the body. There is of course a lack of scientific evidence for qi and the meridians. Therefore, traditional acupuncture is considered a pseudoscience in Western medicine. Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and the Yeti. These are some of the species that cryptozoologists are researching, and they refer to them as cryptids. Ever since the first cameras were created, people have been filming UFOs. Ufology is a pseudoscience, but I think it's a pretty healthy one. How do we know if we are alone in the universe? Maybe there are other species that are interested in our planet and have been visiting for many years. The problem with ufology is that there are so many fake videos out there to the point where the first thought that pops into our heads when we see UFO footage is, that's fake. On the other hand, there are accounts of trained pilots, Navy SEALs, and Army veterans that have described different UFOs. My favorite is the account of the tic-tac shaped UFO described by a Navy pilot in 2004. Homeopaths believe that a substance that causes symptoms of a disease in a healthy person can also cure similar symptoms in sick people. This doctrine is called similia similibus curentur, which means like cured by like. The homeopathic cure is achieved with dilution. This is the process where the remedy is diluted many times, often to the point where there are probably no molecules of the original substance left. You might be wondering, how can this cure you when there's no trace of the original substance? Well, homeopaths believe that the water or any other fluid still retains the memory of the original substance, thus curing you. Throughout history, astrology has always been present. In fact, it's been present since at least 2000 BCE. The Hindus, the Chinese, and the Mayans, for example, had developed systems for predicting terrestrial events from celestial observation. Western astrology originates in Babylon and the ancient Greece. It uses the positions of the sun, moon, and the planets at the moment of a person's birth to provide insight into their character, personality, and growth. This is called tropical astrology. It's based on seasons, so it uses the Earth's position at the moment of your birth to define the zodiac sign. It starts with Aries at the spring equinox. This is a fixed system, meaning that Aries always starts around the 21st of March, no matter where the stars were at the time of your birth. Eastern astrology, however, for example that of the Hindus, is a little bit different. This form of astrology uses sidereal or constellation-based astrology. It uses the actual position of the stars and constellations in the sky at the moment of your birth. Since the Earth wobbles slightly over time, this leads to the positions of the stars shifting slowly. Sidereal astrology adjusts for this shift, so it moves the signs to match where the stars are positioned at the time of your birth. Crystal healing uses semi-precious stones such as quartz, agate, and amethyst, which have healing powers according to this branch of alternative medicine. The practitioners believe that they can boost low energy, prevent bad energy, and release blocked energy. Crystals are often placed on the body, corresponding to chakras.
This chakra deals with willpower and is blocked by shame. What are you ashamed of?
The origins of crystal healing are quite old. It reportedly originates from the Sumerians, some 6,000 years ago. Ancient Egyptians also used crystals for their metaphysical properties, such as healing and protection. The ancient Greeks used amethyst to prevent intoxication. The word amethyst in Greek literally means not intoxicated. Conversion therapy is a practice of attempting to change someone's sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. It's used to align an individual with heterosexual and cisgender norms. Some of the methods include brain surgery, surgical castration, electroshock therapy, and hypnosis. Oil from the Chinese water snake has been used in traditional Chinese medicine to treat arthritis and bursitis for centuries. Today, though, this term is used for deceptive marketing or a plain old scam. A snake oil salesman is used to describe someone who sells a fraudulent cure. The term originates from the 18th and the 19th century, where men looking to make a quick buck sold mineral oil, often mixed with some herbs and spices, as snake oil, claiming that they can cure you. Many believers of anti-vaccination believe that vaccines can cause serious side effects and harm, for example autism or autoimmune disorders, for example. Let's keep this one brief. There are people that believe the earth is flat. That's the entry. How did people cure themselves before the invention of modern medication? They used what they found in nature. The history of herbal medicine is probably as old as humanity itself. In fact, it probably predates modern Homo sapiens. Archaeologists have found pollen and flower fragments from several different medicinal plants in Neanderthal tombs in Iraq, which are dating back around 60,000 years. Cannabis is said to have been used in China for over 8,000 years. The poppy was initially cultivated in Mesopotamia around 6,000 years ago, and the opium obtained from it has been in medicinal use ever since then. Prior to the 1906 Food and Drugs Act, herbal medicine was used in the United States as well. Today, there are people that still practice herbal medicine, and it's probably effective to some degree, since all modern medicine is at least partially based on traditional herbal medicine. A life force is an invisible and non-measurable energy that guides physical and mental processes. One such life force is called Qi, which is central to Chinese medicine and martial arts. Qi is believed to flow through pathways in the body, which are called the meridians, as we mentioned a little bit earlier. In Hindu and yogic traditions, this life force is called prana. It flows through the body's channels, which are called nadis, and is regulated through breathing techniques, which are called pranayama, as well as meditation and physical postures, or asanas. Many of us, myself included, have always referred to the polygraph test as a lie detector test, which is in fact false. All that a polygraph test does is measure blood pressure, pulse, respiration, and skin conductivity while a person is asked a series of questions. The idea being that deceptive answers will produce physiological responses that can be differentiated from those associated with non-deceptive ones. However, there are no physiological reactions associated with lying. Therefore, this is rendered pseudoscientific. Let's first define the term climate change. It refers to long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns. These shifts can occur naturally through the Earth's own weather and climate cycles, or perhaps due to large volcanic eruptions. Since around the 1800s, however, human activities have been the driving force for climate change because we burn fossil fuels like coal, energy, and gas. This generates greenhouse emissions, which trap the sun's heat and result in rising temperatures. Let's now look at some ways that greenhouse gases can be produced naturally and that were present before humans even existed. We mentioned volcanic activity, which releases CO2, but volcanoes also evaporate huge amounts of water, and water vapor is another potent greenhouse gas. Next are wildfires. Natural wildfires ignited by lightning, for example, release CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide into the atmosphere. Next is the respiration or breathing of plants and animals, which is also a cause for CO2, although not as big, obviously. Then there is the melting of permafrost. As permafrost melts, especially during interglacial periods, it releases large amounts of methane which has been trapped under the ice. These are just a few examples. There are many, many more. I am not stating this to deny the humanity's impact on climate change, but rather to shed light on some perhaps lesser known causes. Back to our entry now. Climate change deniers deny the human's responsibility for climate change. Faith healing uses religious beliefs in order to cure an illness or an injury. Deities intervene and heal you. Spiritual healing is a bit more broad. It involves channeling spiritual energy in order to promote physical, emotional, or mental well-being. The term pyramidology usually refers to the belief that the pyramids hold mystical and prophetic powers. More blandly though, pyramidology also refers to theories regarding the construction of these pyramids, most notably the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Originally, the pyramid was encased in white limestone, which looked absolutely majestic. Its sides have a consistent gradient of 52 degrees. It's constructed of around 2 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2.5 to 15 tons. Its alignment with true north is more accurate than most modern-day structures. Let's now discuss how these stone blocks were moved. One theory is that since back then the Nile was much closer to the side of the pyramid than it is today, water lubrication was used to slide the blocks. Another interesting pseudoscientific theory is that they used chants and songs, and the reverberation helped support the blocks, making them easier to carry. Feng Shui, literally meaning wind-water, is a form of geomancy that originates in ancient China and claims to use energy forces to harmonize an individual with their surroundings. The ancient Chinese believed that landscapes and bodies of water directed the flow of the universal qi through places and structures. There are two types of feng shui. One is traditional and one is Western. Traditional feng shui is a system that is based on observation of heavenly time and earthly space. There are two branches of traditional feng shui. The first is called the form branch, and it is the oldest known branch of feng shui. It was first described in the Book of the Tomb by Qin Wuzi in the Han Dynasty, which lasted from 202 BC to 220 AD. The form branch refers to the shape of the environment, such as mountains, rivers, and the general surroundings. It considers three things: the 5 celestial animals, which are the vermilion phoenix, the azure dragon, white tiger, black turtle, and the yellow snake. Secondly, it takes into account the yin-yang concepts, and lastly, the traditional 5 elements, which are wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. It analyzes the shape of the land and the flow of the wind and water in order to find a place with ideal qi. It also considers the time of important events, such as the birth of the resident. The second branch is called the compass branch, which is based on the use of a compass to determine the precise orientation of a building or a space. It uses the Luo Pan compass, which is a specialized tool used by feng shui practitioners. The compass is used to measure the directions of a property and analyze the energies present in those directions. Then we have the 8 mansions technique, which is a system used to determine the most favorable and unfavorable areas of a home based on its orientation and the personal energy of its occupants. Now on to Western feng shui. Western feng shui uses the Bagua method, which utilizes the Bagua map. This map aligns with the front door. It divides the space into 9 life areas, for example wealth, love, and career, in order to arrange furniture and objects for better energy flow. According to the hollow earth theory, the earth is a shell with walls that are about 800 miles or 1300 kilometers thick. In the polar regions, there are holes that measure to 1400 miles or 2200 kilometers across. A sea or surface traveler could cross over an edge of the hole, like an ant crawling over the lip of a coffee mug from the outside to the inside, and not be aware that he was actually entering the interior of the earth. There is contrary evidence that disproves the hollow earth theory. The first one is seismic. A seismic wave is a wave of energy that travels through the earth and is caused by earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, or man-made explosions. The picture of the structure of the earth that has been arrived at through the study of seismic waves is quite different from a fully hollow earth. The time it takes for seismic waves to travel through and around the earth directly contradicts a fully hollow sphere. Before we explain dowsing, let's first explain divination. It is the practice of seeking knowledge about future events through supernatural means. For example, through tarot cards, crystal balls, and the like. Dowsing is a type of divination that aims to locate groundwater, buried metals, gemstones, oil, grave sites, or malign earth vibrations. This is done using an instrument called the dowsing rod. The motion of it is said to reveal the location of the targeted material. Dianetics theory splits the human mind into two parts, the conscious analytical mind and the subconscious reactive mind. The purpose of Dianetics is to erase the reactive mind, which holds painful and destructive emotions. This process is called auditing, and it uses hypnosis. During auditing, a person is asked a series of questions, which are intended to help them locate and deal with painful past experiences. Dianetics was invented in 1950 by a science fiction writer called Ron Hubbard. According to him, he had a near-death experience while he was sedated during a dental operation in 1938. This inspired him to write the manuscript on Dianetics. In his work, Hubbard claimed that the source of all psychological pain, and therefore the cause of mental and physical health problems, was a form of memory known as engrams. Engrams are the painful and destructive emotions that are present in the body. Dianetics is a method which erases these engrams in the reactive mind, thus achieving a state of clear. The procedure itself involves two people. One is called an auditor, who guides the other person, who is called the pre-clear. The pre-clear's job is to look at their mind and talk to the auditor. The latter then acknowledges what the pre-clear is saying and controls the process. The good old ancient aliens, the staple of the History Channel, which sparked many memes over the years. Although this entry probably refers to the theory that aliens have been visiting the Earth throughout its history. The theory is that deities from most, if not all religions, are of extraterrestrial origin, and that advanced technologies were not invented by humans, but were brought to Earth by ancient astronauts that were interpreted as gods by early humans. The art of palmistry has been practiced throughout historical cultures such as those of India, Babylonia, and China. It is considered to be a branch of Samudrika Shastra, which is the ancient Indian study of human marks on a person's body. Palmistry started in India and spread to China, Tibet, and later Europe. In the Renaissance, it was one of the several forbidden arts, along with necromancy, geomancy, and pyromancy, to name a few. In the 16th century, it was being actively persecuted and suppressed by the Catholic Church. It experienced a revival later in the year 1839 when Captain Casimir Stanislas published a work named La Chironomie. Then in the year 1889, the Chirological Society of Great Britain was founded in London by Catherine St. Hill. This was done with the intent of advancing and systemizing the art of palmistry and preventing charlatans from abusing it. But how does palmistry even work? It focuses on the dominant hand in order to read into your current life, and the non-dominant hand to determine your unfulfilled potentials. It uses several key lines on the hand. The heart line reflects emotions and love life. It runs horizontally near the top of the palm. The head line represents intellect and decision making. It's located beneath the heart line and runs horizontally across the palm. The lifeline indicates general well-being, vitality, and major life events, and it curves around the base of the thumb. Lastly, the fate line, which is sometimes missing, represents your career and destiny. It runs vertically up the middle of the palm. Then there are the mounts of Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Apollo, and Mercury, which also represent certain humanly traits and ambitions. This is a very brief explanation, and there is a lot more to palmistry, which ended up being a pretty interesting entry on this iceberg. Let's first explain a few terms. First is young Earth creationism. This theory believes that the Earth was created around 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. Next, we will explain the literalist and the interantist interpretations of the Bible. The literalist interpretation believes that everything in the Bible is factually true and that it should be understood exactly as it's written. So, if the Bible says that the Earth was created in 6 days, a literalist will believe that it happened in 6 24-hour days. The interantist interpretation, on the other hand, believes that the Bible is without any errors or mistakes. It doesn't specifically mean that every passage must be taken at face value, but that everything in the Bible is 100% true and trustworthy. Interantists may allow for metaphorical or symbolic readings, but still see the overall message as free from errors. Let's now explain what scientific creationism is about. It's a form of young earth creationism which claims to offer scientific arguments for both the literalist and the interrantist interpretations of the Bible. Creationists claim that by using creation science, they can disprove or re-explain a variety of scientific theories and paradigms regarding geology, cosmology, biology, and linguistics. For example, they claim that certain geological features, such as the Grand Canyon, were not formed over millions of years, but rather were formed quickly during the biblical flood, as it is described in the book of Genesis. The practice of phrenology has its roots dating back to 1796, when a German physician called Franz Joseph Gall began lecturing on organology. Phrenology measures bumps on the skull in order to predict mental traits. It is based on the idea that the brain is the organ of the mind, and that specific brain areas possess specific localized functions. It was believed that the brain was composed of different muscles, so those that were used more often grew bigger, which would result in the skull having different shapes. Ear candling works by lying down and sticking one end of a hollow candle in the ear and lighting the other one. The wax doesn't actually drip into the ear. What does happen though is that the flame creates negative pressure, which draws wax and debris out of the ear canal. Mainstream medicine rejects this process, stating that there is no data to suggest that it's effective. It can actually cause more harm than good because you're sticking foreign objects into your ear. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection is entirely focused on an explanation of life's biological diversity. The central theory is natural selection, which says that those who are better suited for their environment will survive, and as they reproduce, they will pass down these advantageous traits to their offspring. Over many generations, these changes will accumulate, which will lead to a gradual transformation of a species and the development of new ones. That is the general theory which Charles Darwin proposed. Social Darwinism takes this and applies it to societies. Social Darwinists believe in the survival of the fittest theory, and that only the strongest and the best groups can survive and prosper. They also have an explanation for inequality. They believe that social, economic, or racial disparities are a result of a natural difference in people's ability and worth, which leads to some groups being superior to others. I see social Darwinism as the David Goggins Sigma grind set mentality, and frankly, I find it to be a little bit goofy. Parapsychology is the study of psychic phenomena, such as telepathy and precognition. One of the tests that determine whether a subject is telepathic is called the Ganzfeld test. The person that is the subject of this test is called the receiver. They are exposed to two external stimuli, a visual and an auditory one. The visual stimuli is a soft red glow. The subject is seated in a reclined position. A ping pong ball is cut in half and the two halves are placed over the eyes. The auditory senses are then blocked by playing white noise. The other person is called the sender. They are located in a different room and are shown a random image or video. Their task is to mentally transmit this image to the receiver, and the receiver's task is to receive it and interpret it telepathically. Then there is remote viewing, which is also a branch of parapsychology. It is the practice of seeking impressions about a distant or otherwise unseen target using extrasensory perception. This is the ability to receive information beyond the five senses, so through telepathy or through the ability to see distant events, which is called clairvoyance. Lastly, we are going to mention psychokinesis on random number generators. So, a random number generator, or an RNG, which is based on electronic noise, produces a data stream that is recorded and analyzed by a computer. A subject tries to mentally alter the generation of random numbers. In practice, this might be trying to get the coin to flip tails more often than it does heads. Let's describe Atlantis, first mentioned in Plato's Timaeus and Critias, which are parts of an allegory of the hubris of nations. Hubris stands for a personality trait of extreme pride or dangerous overconfidence and complacency. In the story, Atlantis is described as a naval empire that ruled all western parts of the known world. By known world, I mean the world that was known to Greeks at that time. Aristotle believed that Plato, who was also his teacher, came up with this island of Atlantis in order to teach philosophy. We can certainly interpret it this way, because in Plato's Republic, the described ideal state, which is led by the ideal philosopher king, could definitely be Atlantis. On the other hand, a philosopher named Crantor, who was a student of another student of Plato called Xenocrates, thought that the story of Atlantis was historical fact. He relayed these thoughts in his commentary of the Timaeus. It might seem at first that this is connected to the study of humor, but it's actually an ancient Greek and Roman system of medicine, which specialized in the makeup and workings of the human body. The name originated from the Greek word chemos, which translates literally to juice or sap, metaphorically flavor. Hippocrates described 4 humors, which were further developed by Galen. He described the 4 bodily fluids and how an excess of each has an effect on the body. We also mentioned these in my psychology iceberg, but let's go over them again. First is black bile, which corresponds to sadness and introspection. A person with an excess of black bile is melancholic, analytical, detail-oriented, introverted, or prone to depression. Second is yellow bile, corresponding to aggression, passion, and leadership. Individuals with an excess of yellow bile are ambitious, energetic, but prone to anger. Third is phlegm, corresponding to a phlegmatic temperament, which is calm and reliable. A person with an excess of phlegm was thought to be peaceful and tended to avoid conflict. Lastly, blood, which corresponds to a sociable and optimistic person who is warm-hearted and outgoing. The word alchemy originates from the Arabic word alchemia. It is an ancient branch of natural philosophy which was practiced in China, India, the Arabic world, and Europe. Alchemists were interested in the transmutation of base metals, such as lead, into noble metals, such as gold. They were also concerned with the creation of an elixir of immortality and the creation of remedies that would cure any disease and attempt to prolong life indefinitely. Western alchemy originates from Hellenistic Egypt, specifically Alexandria, which was the center of alchemical knowledge. Alchemists actually invented techniques like distillation. They also invented certain instruments, such as funnels, flasks, and couples, which are still used today. This is a pretty wild one. It states that someone can literally pass their hand through your skin and grab the malign object in your body, for example a tumor, and remove it from your body without leaving any marks or scars. That's all there really is to this entry. It's a pretty bad hoax, but it has been present since the 1940s. Osteopathy is based on the principle that your well-being depends on your bones, muscles, ligaments, and connective tissue functioning together smoothly. In the UK, osteopathy is a health profession that is regulated by the UK law, so this one isn't fully a pseudoscience. It uses certain massaging techniques, joint movements, stretching, and spinal manipulation in order to help with back, neck, shoulder pain, arthritis, and also with sports injuries. Apitherapy uses bee honey products like pollen, propolis, or beeswax in order to help with multiple sclerosis and arthritis, but also with infections, wounds, and burns. This form of healing dates back to ancient Greece and China. Apitoxin is the venom collected with specific devices placed in the beehive. The bees are then stimulated to sting a special plate, leaving their venom on it. The dried venom is further purified and used to prepare various diluted solutions. Pseudo-archaeology is the interpretation of the past by people who are not professional archaeologists. They reject the accepted knowledge of archaeology. One such person is Graham Hancock, who also has a Netflix show called Ancient Apocalypse, as well as many books in which he presents his evidence for an advanced Ice Age civilization. According to him, the civilization was destroyed in a cataclysmic flood. The survivors of this advanced civilization, according to Hancock, introduced agriculture, architecture, astronomy, arts, mathematics, and the knowledge of civilizations to simple hunter-gatherers. The only site that Hancock visits that actually dates to near the end of the Ice Age is Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey. One of the points he makes that makes sense is that history is incomplete and that we are missing large parts of time in our records. This is just a fact. There is so much knowledge that has been lost to us, knowledge that would probably explain many of today's mysteries, but I don't think it's very healthy to come up with your own theories for these patches of history and call them a fact. According to this theory, we should improve the human population by controlling who gets to have children. These people will be chosen based on the belief that there are those who have better traits, for example higher intelligence, better physical ability, or are healthier than others. We should then also prevent people with bad traits from reproducing, thus creating a better society. Eugenics is the opposite of euthenics, which is a study that focuses on improving human functioning and well-being by improving the living conditions. The guy that came up with modern eugenics was Francis Galton in 1883. He was actually a half-cousin of Charles Darwin. He defined his works as the study of all agencies under human control which can improve or impair the racial quality of future generations. He was the first to apply Darwin's theory to human relations because he believed that certain desirable human qualities were also hereditary, although Darwin completely disagreed with this theory. Eugenics became an academic discipline at many colleges and universities and received funding from various sources. There were dedicated organizations formed to win public support for responsible eugenic values, including the British Eugenics Education Society of 1907 and the American Eugenics Society of 1921. Later, a certain man named Adolf was also a big fan of eugenics. By the end of World War II, however, eugenics laws were abandoned because of their association with the regime that Adolf was in charge of. Colloidal silver is a drink that contains tiny particles of silver and is often promoted as a dietary supplement. These concoctions were used by physicians in the early 20th century, and they were a supplement for antibiotics because those were only invented in the 1940s, which is also when colloidal silver was discontinued. During 2020, however, a televangelist by the name of Jim Baker, who is also a convicted felon, was sued for marketing colloidal silver as a cure for COVID-19. Another word that originates from Greek, krios meaning cold. Cryonics is essentially human storage. They freeze you to around -200 degrees Celsius or -320 degrees Fahrenheit and hope that you can be resurrected one day in the far future. Cryonics procedures can begin only after you are clinically deceased. It can already start only minutes after you're dead. Substances called cryoprotectants are used to prevent the formation of ice during cryopreservation. These same substances are found in certain animals, such as Arctic insects, fish, and other amphibians. They use them to protect their tissue from freezing damage. So, what actually is this process? You get frozen and then what? Essentially, you are hoping that in the future, there will be medical advances that will be able to repair damage caused by disease, aging, and freezing that could potentially revive the body and the brain. Proponents say that there are similarities to organ transplantation, which is conceptually true, but in reality, your body isn't one organ. There are many. Your brain, which we don't even know how it fully works, is extremely complex. Ice crystals will still form in the brain and on the tissue, and those very much can cause irreversible damage. On top of that, because cryonics start after you're dead, there is already some decomposition and a lack of oxygen in the brain, which does cause brain damage. Have you ever seen athletes have visible spots on their body that look like bruises? That's actually because of cupping therapy. Suction cups are put onto the skin for a few minutes. The idea is that this draws blood to specific parts of your body, thus helping with pain, inflammation, and relaxation. It's also a type of deep tissue massage. Cupping therapy actually dates back to ancient Egypt, China, and the Middle Eastern cultures. There is an ancient Egyptian textbook from 1500 BC that describes cupping therapy. They used it for treating fever and pain. This practice is still considered alternative medicine because it's not clear if it helps with easing pain or other symptoms that we mentioned. Cupping therapy is also used for certain blood disorders, such as anemia, which is when the blood doesn't have enough red blood cells. Additionally, it's used for hemophilia, which is when the blood doesn't clot the way it's supposed to because it doesn't have enough blood clotting proteins. It also helps with eczema and acne, among a few other disorders. Athletes undergo cupping therapy to prevent pain. It can apparently help with their body heal faster if they are dealing with an injury and faster recovery. Microscopic hair analysis has been traditionally used in forensics. An analyst examines a lot of different characteristics of a hair under a microscope and compares it to the hair taken from the crime scene. The problem is that many of these hair analysis tests have been overturned by DNA testing. Because of that, many people have been falsely convicted. In 2012, the Department of Justice has conducted many tests in which hair analysis testimony was given, and they found that a high number of testimonies could not be supported by hair analysis on its own, therefore rendering it pseudoscientific. In traditional Chinese medicine, pulse diagnosis acted as a sort of MRI. Before we had modern imaging techniques, practitioners needed a way of evaluating what was happening inside your body. It was most commonly done before acupuncture. Evaluating your pulse meant evaluating its rate. A fast pulse indicated an excess of heat in the body, while a slow pulse means that you have certain problems with your blood circulation. A strong pulse means you're under stress or have high blood pressure, while a weak pulse means that you have low blood pressure, which could be a cause for insomnia. Then they also measure the width of your pulse. A thin pulse means you have some sort of fatigue and weakness, while a wide pulse means that you may have some digestive issues. In Ayurveda, which is the ancient Indian form of medicine, physicians could detect imbalances in the 3 doshas. Dosha translates into that which causes problems. These 3 doshas are the Vata, Pitta and Kapha dosha. The Vata dosha encompasses air and space. The primary functions are actually all movements in the body. So for example, circulation, breathing, blinking and heart function, but also mental activities like communication and creativity. A sign of an imbalance of the Vata dosha is anxiety, insomnia, dry skin and digestive tissues like gas or bloating. The remedies are warm and grounding foods like nuts, mushrooms or seeds. The Pitta dosha represents the metabolism. Signs of imbalances are inflammation, heartburn, and also anger or skin rashes. The key to balancing this dosha is eating calming foods and avoiding stress and heat. Lastly, we have the Kapha dosha. It's responsible for the structure and lubrication of the body. It governs all tissues and the immune system. Signs of imbalances are lethargy or weight gain. In order to bring balance to this dosha, you have to eat stimulating foods and engage in stimulating activities. Perpetual motion is the motion of an object that doesn't stop. It goes on forever and ever. The only problem is that such machines supposedly do not exist, and the science says that they cannot exist. Every theory for perpetual motion violates at least one law of thermodynamics. For example, the first law states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Instead, only its form can be altered. And this is already where the idea of a perpetual motion machine dies out. Because the machine can only ever produce as much energy as it consumes, there would be no energy left to power a car or any other machine or device. Okay, but what if we just want the machine to power itself? Even if a machine tries to keep running forever, it will always lose some energy along the way, like through heat or friction. Since no machine can avoid this, it will eventually run out of energy and stop. For example, Robert Boyle came up with the idea of a self-watering perpetual flask. In his theory, capillary action, which is the attraction between water and surfaces, would pull the water through the pipe. This would keep the water cycling through the flask indefinitely. But if the capillary action is strong enough to overcome gravity and draw the water up, it would also prevent it from falling back into the bowl. Then there are the ideas with magnets. The ball is supposed to be pulled towards the top, where the magnet is located, then fall through the hole and back down to the start, and the motion would repeat. The problem here is that the magnet would simply hold the ball at the top, but even if the ball somehow kept moving, the magnet would lose its strength and the machine would stop working over time. For each of these machines to keep working, they would have to create some extra energy in order to nudge the system past its stopping point, and in turn breaking the first law of thermodynamics. There are some machines that seem to keep going though, but in reality, they inevitably turn out to be drawing energy from some external source. Even if a machine that didn't violate the first law was somehow created, it still wouldn't work in the real world because of the second law of thermodynamics, which tells us that energy tends to spread out through processes like friction. Any real machine would have moving parts or interactions with air or liquid molecules that would generate tiny amounts of friction and heat. That heat is energy escaping, thus reducing the energy that is meant to keep the machine moving. The machine would keep losing tiny amounts of energy until it inevitably stopped. We humans use an enormous amount of energy, and as our population will grow, we will be using even more. Our current energy sources all have drawbacks in the long term. Oil is efficient, but we will run out of it eventually, and it also pollutes the environment. What about coal? There is a lot of coal, but it's even more polluting. Solar energy is appealing, but it's only as dependable as a sunny day. We are looking for a clean and reliable source of energy that won't run out in the near future. Such an energy source has been discovered in seawater. Seawater contains an element called deuterium hydrogen with an extra neutron. In theory, deuterium can undergo fusion reactions, releasing vast amounts of energy without producing harmful byproducts. Neurosis is a broad term that describes mental disorders caused by past anxieties that have been repressed. Arthur Yano, who is a proponent of primal therapy, argues that repressed pain can be brought to conscious awareness by re-experiencing specific incidents. Essentially, certain mental disorders arise when your body has not fully processed the trauma, so re-experiencing it could help resolve them. This certainly makes sense at first, because one of the cures for certain phobias is exposure therapy. So, let's dive a bit deeper into primal therapy. Yano believed that there is only one source of mental illness, besides genetic defects, and that is imprinted pain. Therefore, there is only one effective cure: re-experiencing the trauma. According to Yanov, primal pains are imprinted in the lower brain first, then later the limbic system, and still later intellectual defenses are formed by the cortex, simply because this is the sequence of neurological development. Primal therapy is not accepted in the field of psychology because it is regarded as one of the least credible forms of psychotherapy. According to numerologists, everything in the world is dependent on numerical patterns. Each number has a unique vibration and holds certain properties. When numerology is applied to a person's name, it becomes a form of onomancy, which is a kind of fortune-telling. There are various numerological systems which assign numerical values to the letters of the alphabet. Numerologists really like Pythagoras and his theory. The Pythagorean method assigns the letters of the Latin alphabet to numerical values from 1 to 9. To calculate a person's numerological value, you add the numerical values of each letter in their name. If the sum is greater than 9, you reduce it further by adding the digits together until you reach a single digit. This final number is believed to reveal personality traits and a person's destiny. Let's also mention angel numbers. They are numbers that consist of repeating digits, and these numbers have numerological significance. Seeing angel numbers is apparently not a coincidence, but rather a form of guidance. 111, for example, represents new beginnings and opportunities. 222 symbolizes balance and harmony, and so on, up until 999. Marie Baker Eddy was an American religious leader and a healer who founded the Church of Christian Science in 1879. Proponents of Christian Science believe that sickness can be cured through prayer and that the presence of an illness is the result of mental and spiritual discrepancy in the body. In the ancient times, and all the way until 1880, it was believed that miasma, which stands for pollution, was the cause for diseases such as cholera, chlamydia, and the Black Death. The theory stated that these diseases were caused by noxious air, and that epidemics were caused by miasma, which emanated from rotting organic matter. This theory originates from ancient China. They believed that miasma was caused by heat, moisture, and the dead air that came from southern Chinese mountains. They thought that waste produced by insects polluted the air, the fog, and the water, and the virgin forest harbored a great environment for miasma to occur. According to ancient Chinese medicine, good health relies on qi flowing easily and unobstructedly through the body. If there is a blockage of qi, you will start having health issues. Gua sha is a method of improving blood flow and removing blockages of qi. These blockages are called blood stasis in traditional Chinese medicine. Your body is scraped with a tool, which releases tired and still muscle areas and stimulates new blood flow. This leaves bruising and red areas on your skin, but improves the blood circulation and the overall health of the body. This is another practice that is based on qi, although this one originates from Japan. It's a technique called palm healing, where energy is transferred through the palms. Reiki was founded in the early 20th century by Mikao Usui, who is considered the father of ancient medicine. There are so many stories about how Reiki healed all sorts of problems, from neurological problems, solving back pain, healing depression, solving dating issues, saving a poisoned dog, to healing heart problems. There's thousands of these stories. Let's divide this topic into two layers. First, we're going to explain quantum mechanics, and only then will we dive into quantum mysticism. So, quantum mechanics. Let's imagine that we want to flip a coin. There are three states of a coin flip. The first one is before the flip, when you hold a coin in your hand just before flipping it. This is when the coin is in a state where it could be either heads or tails. This concept in quantum mechanics is called superposition, where particles can exist in multiple states at once. Next is the flipping of the coin itself. While the coin is flipping in the air, it has not yet settled into a state. It's in a sort of temporary limbo mode. Quantum particles, like electrons, protons, and photons for example, also exist in a state of uncertainty until the moment they're observed. This means that we can only describe their behavior in terms of probabilities. Before a particle is observed and thus measured, we cannot say for certain what state it is in. Same with the coin that is flipping in the air. Lastly, we have the landing of the coin. This is the moment when we can say for certain which state the coin is in. It's either heads or tails. This is just like measuring a quantum particle. So, quantum mechanics explains how the smallest particles, like protons and electrons, behave. This is still all part of accepted science. Now we're going to delve into quantum mysticism, which is pseudoscientific. Quantum mysticism believes that there is conscious or intelligence or an otherwise mystical component to existence of reality on the quantum scale. In order to understand what quantum mysticism is about, we first have to explain a phenomenon called the observer effect. This concept is still a part of accepted quantum mechanics. When we observe a particle or a phenomenon, we are changing it just by looking at it. This happens at the quantum level with particles like protons and electrons. Before we observe them, they can be in multiple places or states at the same time, but the moment we observe them, we collapse them into one definite state. So, our act of observing influences the outcome. This is again a proven fact that is accepted in quantum mechanics. But how does this connect to quantum mysticism? Quantum mysticism adds that maybe our thoughts and awareness do more than just observe. What if reality itself is shaped by the fact that you are consciously thinking about it? Believers in quantum mysticism say that you are able to bring your goals into existence by focusing on them, and that consciousness can affect the physical world. So for example, healing through prayer is possible. Since things aren't in a definite state until they're observed, just like how video games only render the direction that you're looking at, we cannot say for certain that something is or isn't there until we observe it. This could be proof that we're living in a simulation, because you cannot be 100% certain that the things you don't see exist there right now. So, if you're looking at a tree and then you turn away, can you be 100% sure that the tree is still there? This theory is very complex and it's completely dismissed by science, but I still try to take a critical look at it and bring our imagination to work. Let's imagine a blacksmith who is working hard every day. Since he is using his hands to strike the anvil many times over and over, the muscles in his hands will grow and become strong. Let's now imagine that the blacksmith has a son. According to Lamarckism, his son will inherit those strong muscles from his dad. So, the central theory is that physical traits that were acquired through repeated use can be passed down to the offspring. The long neck of the giraffe is used as proof that Lamarckism is real. As giraffes had to reach for ever higher leaves, their necks adapted and the genes had been passed down for generations. Lamarckism is named after the French zoologist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, who lived in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Lamarckism has been disproved and is not accepted today, except in one branch, kind of. That branch is called epigenetics, which is the study of heritable traits. You can imagine a set of instructions for each gene, which influences how that specific organism works. It's the reason why, even though every cell in your body has the same DNA, your heart cells act differently from your brain cells. Some scientists argue that epigenetic inheritance works in a similar way to Lamarckism, through a process called DNA methylation. When you're growing as an embryo, all of your cells start with the same DNA, but they need to become different types of cells, like muscle, brain, or skin cells. DNA methylation helps by silencing genes that are needed for a specific type of cell. A famous example of DNA methylation involves people who experienced famine. Studies found that descendants of people who were exposed to starvation during pregnancy showed different patterns of DNA methylation. These changes affected genes involved in metabolism and fat storage, making future generations more prone to obesity and diabetes, even though they didn't experience the famine directly. This is one possible example of how Lamarckism could actually be a real thing, but even that is a stretch, since it's not accepted by mainstream science. Graphology is the study and analysis of handwriting, usually in an attempt to determine the writer's personality traits. There are certain key factors that a graphologist will look for. Firstly, there is the slant of the handwriting. If the handwriting is slanted, the writer may want to be friendly, manipulative, responsive, or he may want to sell or control. If the handwriting is upright, this indicates independence. A right slant indicates a response to communication, and a left slant shows emotion and reserve. A large handwriting can mean the person is extroverted, or it can mean that the writer is putting on an act of confidence. Small handwriting can mean the opposite. Heavy pressure indicates commitment, but if it's excessively heavy, it can mean that the writer is uptight and reactionary. Light pressure shows sensitivity to empathy, but if the pressure is uneven and light at the same time, it can show a lack of vitality. These are just a few examples. Graphology itself is not sufficient in profiling someone and should be used as a complementary method along with other more concrete methods. That's why it's considered pseudoscience. The earliest records of the geocentric model appeared in the ancient Babylonian and Greek astronomy. Anaximander from the 6th century BCE was one of the first influential philosophers who was also a proponent of the geocentric model. This model proposes that the Earth is the center of the universe and the Sun and other planets orbit around. It was scientifically accepted up until the 16th century. Modern geocentrism is a theory that is led by Robert Sungenis, who holds a degree in theology. The major work on modern geocentrism is a book called Galileo Was Wrong, the Church Was Right, written by Sungenis in 2014. The book is part of his doctoral thesis at Calamus International University, which is an unaccredited distance learning institution in the Republic of Vanuatu. The book opens with this: unbeknownst to almost the entire human race is the fact that no one in all of human history has ever proven the Earth moves in space. Sungenis believes that luminiferous aether exists. This substance was an explanation popular in the 19th century for how light waves could travel through space. The theory was that light waves needed a medium in order to travel, and this medium was luminiferous aether. This theory was disproved mainly by Einstein in 1905. Modern geocentrists propose that the reason for the sun rising and setting is that the entire universe revolves around our planet once a day. Wilhelm Reich was an Austrian psychoanalyst who first described orgone, which is a form of life energy or cosmic energy that exists everywhere and influences physical, emotional, and cosmic processes. He also believed that this energy could be harvested and manipulated for health benefits, so he created a device called the orgone accumulator. He believed that illnesses, especially mental illnesses, were caused by blockages of orgone energy in the body, and that one could be healed by sitting in an orgone accumulator. The US Food and Drug Administration, or FDA for short, didn't like this, so they took legal action against him, which eventually led to his imprisonment. His work was classified as pseudoscience, and his books and devices were destroyed. During World War II, many planes carrying expensive cargo were landing in the Pacific. The local tribes saw this and started creating makeshift airstrips in hopes of attracting the planes and the wealth that they brought. They mimicked the external rituals without understanding the internal mechanisms behind the planes' arrival, much like pseudoscience mimics real science without understanding or applying its core principles. This is what Richard Feynman said during a commencement speech in 1974. Overall, this entry refers to endeavors and methods that might look scientific, but in reality are devoid of scientific investigation. This is a pretty fun one. It states that the cause for many of our adaptations is that humans were once aquatic apes who became bipedal primarily because of wading into deep water. Some examples that proponents of this theory claim proves it is our hairlessness and the diving reflex, which is the natural response that happens when you are exposed to cold water. It slows the heart rate, redirects blood from vital organs to your heart and brain, and reduces oxygen use in other parts of your body. Some arguments for this theory are that our trachea is in the throat instead of the nasal cavity. Trachea is the windpipe. It carries air to and from your lungs. Another argument is that humans have a preference for face-to-face sex. Although this one is pretty weird because most aquatic creatures have side-to-side intercourse instead of face-to-face. While this theory is a very fun mental exercise, it's probably not true. Our hairlessness can be explained by the following arguments. We evolved in hot environments, and not having hair helps with cooling. Also, most aquatic mammals have a lot of fur. In fact, they have the thickest and densest fur. Sea otters, fur seals, beavers, and polar bears, just to name a few. We also have long limbs, which aquatic or semi-aquatic mammals don't have, because those are really bad for swimming. They're also a very bad adaptation for submersion, because water cools down long limbs, decreasing your overall body temperature. Let's return to the diving reflex. Human infants hold their breath automatically when submerged, and our heart rate decreases autonomously when our face is wet. Great proof of the aquatic ape theory, right? Maybe. All mammals that have a womb are born with the diving reflex, and it might be an indicator that a common ancestor to humans was once aquatic. Next, our hooded noses. This one could also be a possible explanation, because dolphins, manatees, sea lions, seals, and beaked whales all have hooded noses. Although our hooded noses could also just be because of the restructuring that our faces have undergone through the years of evolution. Lastly, let's discuss the pruning of our fingers. The idea is that pruning would increase grip underwater, which it doesn't. Every study done disproves this theory. Overall, this is a very fun theory to think about and discuss, but one that doesn't hold much weight. Another very fun one. The sun has risen every day so far for as long as it has existed, so it's reasonable to assume that it always does and it always will. We accept this as fact. Pataphysics, on the other hand, doesn't assume anything. The sun has risen every day until now, but what if tomorrow it doesn't? It treats every instance as unique. It allows for absolutely anything. Another theory in pataphysics is the theory of the veiled lynx, that states that when you feel an awkward silence in a room, you are actually feeling the presence of an invisible animal that feeds off awkward energy. Terence McKenna was an ethnobotanist, a philosopher, and an avid advocate of responsible psychedelic use. He is best known for his stoned ape theory, as well as the time wave zero theory. McKenna believed that time doesn't move in a straight line from one event to another, but instead has patterns and cycles. He explained that throughout human history, there were cycles of big change and innovation, and times of lower innovation and change. In his words, times of high novelty and times of low novelty. He got the idea for this pattern from an ancient Chinese text called the I Ching, which is a book that contains the King Wen sequence. The King Wen sequence is made up of 64 hexagrams, each one consisting of 6 lines that are either broken or unbroken. The broken lines represent yin and the unbroken ones yang. These hexagrams are seen as symbols of cosmic patterns, reflecting the change and dualities found in nature and life.
When one examines the I Ching, the King Wen sequence, what is immediately apparent after only a few minutes of inspection is that it is not simply 64 hexagrams in some random association.
He believed that these hexagrams mapped out an underlying structure of change that could be applied to time itself, and that each hexagram represented a different state of novelty, and that by following these sequences he could create a time wave which showed these fluctuations over time. He used a series of calculations that pointed to a date. That date was the 21st of December 2012. He believed that on this day, the wave of novelty would reach zero. What this means is that this is when novelty will reach its peak and change would become so rapid and intense that everything would transform all at once. According to this theory, ice is the basic substance of all cosmic processes and objects. This theory was proposed by an Austrian engineer called Hans Harbingers in 1912. According to this idea, which he received in a vision in one of his dreams, the solar system had its origin in a gigantic star into which a smaller, dead, waterlogged star fell. This impact caused a huge explosion that flung fragments of the smaller star out into space, where the water condensed and froze into giant blocks of ice. A ring of icy blocks formed into what we now call the Milky Way. He also believed that space is filled with giant masses of ice, and that these masses are responsible for the creation of stars, planets, and all other celestial bodies, and that comets and asteroids are remnants of these icy masses. Harbingers also claimed that Earth had several moons before the current one. These moons began as planets in their own orbits, but over long spans of time started slowly spiraling towards Earth until they disintegrated and their debris became part of Earth's structure. Supposedly, one could identify rock layers from different geological eras by the effects of these moons. He also believed that the destruction of these icy moons was the cause of the Great Biblical Flood. Electrogravitics is a theory which states that gravity can be controlled with electricity. A man by the name of Thomas Townsend Brown worked with capacitors, which are devices that store electrical energy. He believed that when you charge a capacitor with high voltage electricity, it would generate a force that interacts with gravity in order to create lift. In theory, we could create lift in aircrafts just by harnessing electric power without burning fuel. This theory becomes interesting once we look at the conspiracy theories. Some believe that the US government has been investing hundreds of millions of dollars into developing electrogravitics for super advanced aircrafts. Another life force theory. Just like the ones that we have mentioned before, vitalism proposes that living organisms are fundamentally different from non-living entities because they contain some non-physical element. Honestly, there isn't really anything interesting about vitalism. It's just a theory that holds the belief that living beings have a form of vital energy, which is what separates them from non-living ones. Okay, this entry refers to urine therapy. It's a form of alternative medicine that includes drinking one's own urine and massaging it into your skin and gums. This apparently helps with detoxification, boosting of one's immune system, improving skin health, and apparently it has other healing properties. Rolfing is very similar to massaging, but it's more often used to treat medical conditions. A practitioner touches the tissue through the skin and looks for imbalances in texture and temperature. Practitioners also claim that they can separate layers of fascia that have been dislodged from their current position. Fascia is essentially a thin layer of connective tissue that surrounds and supports muscles as well as organs. A Rolfing session finishes with integration, which aims to improve the relationship between body parts in accordance with Dr. Rolf's theories about movement and gravity. Rolfing is a safe practice, but relying on it exclusively as treatment for musculoskeletal pain is probably not a good idea. Physiognomy is one of those terms that doesn't sound like pseudoscience. The word originates from the Greek physis, which means nature, and nomon, meaning the judge or the interpreter, and it's the practice of assessing someone's personality and character based on their outer facial appearance. The practice was quite popular in ancient Greece, and it was already very well developed in the 5th century BC, with Aristotle mentioning it in the 4th century BC as well. Here are some examples of ancient Greek physiognomy. A broad forehead was associated with intelligence, wisdom, and sound judgment, while a narrow forehead could have been a sign of a lack of mental capacity. Large and clear eyes were a sign of openness and honesty. Small and deep-set eyes were linked to a secretive and cunning nature and could have been a sign of melancholy, while bright and shining eyes, on the other hand, were a sign of passion and enthusiasm, but indicated that the person is prone to excessive behavior. A straight nose was a sign of nobility, while a hooked nose could have indicated cunning or deceit. Did Greeks go around looking for these features and labeling anyone with a broad forehead as a genius? Certainly not. These were indicators, and not necessarily factual. I always get nervous seeing someone using a gun in a movie without gloves, then throwing it away after committing a crime. The police will certainly analyze the gun, run fingerprints, trace the gun back to our protagonist, and arrest them, right? But what if fingerprint analysis is just pseudoscience and doesn't provide any definitive proof? The thing is that forensics almost always find only partial fingerprints. They examine them to determine how many points, defined by ridges and whorls of the fingerprint, match with the prints of the suspect. Some experts say that a match can be determined by matching as few as 12 points. Others say that 20 points are necessary to determine a match. If the experts can't agree on what makes a definitive match, how can juries be expected to determine the answer? But let's say that a full fingerprint was lifted from the scene of the crime, and even if the print could be proven beyond all doubt to belong to the suspect, the print itself does not mean that the suspect had anything to do with the crime. It only proves that he or she was in that location at some point in time, possibly days or even weeks before the crime occurred. Is it a pseudoscience? I don't know, but we can say with certainty that the evidence it provides is inconclusive and oftentimes disregarded. Vastu Shastra comes from India and is a traditional Hindu system of architecture which originates from the Vedas. It describes the principle of design, layout, measurements, and spatial geometry. The goal is to harmonize buildings with the natural world. The theory is that all things in the universe have a level of energy, therefore all the buildings and land also have a certain energy vibration. There are positive and negative energies, and Vastu Shastra aims to eliminate the negative and enhance the positive ones. If a building doesn't follow principles of this practice, then the thinking and actions of the people inside will not be harmonious, and it could lead to physical illnesses, disorders, and even untimely death. Let's now describe traditional Vastu Shastra. It integrates Indian cosmology and geometry. The 5 elements are earth, water, fire, air, and space. Earth represents support and stability and is linked to southwest, which is considered ideal for the main structure of the building. Water symbolizes fluidity, purity, and abundance and is connected to the northeast. It's ideal for bathrooms and kitchens. Fire represents energy and passion and is linked to the southeast. It's ideal for kitchens. Air signifies movement, communication, and freedom and is associated with the northwest. It's ideal for guest rooms. Proper airflow is vital for maintaining positive energy. Lastly, space. It represents infinity and is not confined to a specific direction because it permeates the entire environment. In 1891, William Bates published an article in which he claimed to have successfully reversed myopia, or nearsightedness. The accepted medical explanation for how the eye focuses is that the ciliary muscle adjusts the shape of the lens. In 1920, Bates disagreed with this explanation. He believed that the lens wasn't involved at all. He believed that the muscle that is responsible for controlling focus is the extraocular muscle, which is the one that surrounds the eyeball. His technique for curing myopia involved closing the eyes for a minute at a time in order to help them relax. He also believed that relaxation could be deepened by palming the eyes without putting pressure on the eyeball. Another one of his methods was visualization. He recommended that patients think of all the top letters from an eye chart and then visualize progressively smaller black letters and eventually a period or a comma. He also recommended sun gazing, which is the practice of looking directly into the sun. This is actually incredibly harmful, so he later suggested exposing only the white part of the eyeball to direct sunlight and only for a few seconds at a time. We mentioned earlier that the term snake oil is used for deceptive marketing, although this entry refers to actual uses of snake oil in the past. In traditional Chinese medicine, oil from the Chinese water snake was used to relieve pain, inflammation, and treat arthritis and bursitis. Bursitis is the inflammation of the bursa, which is a small sac located near the joints. It's filled with fluid that acts as a cushion between bones, tendons, muscles, or skin. The Chinese water snake has a lot of omega-3 fatty acids, which have been shown to have certain health benefits, so snake oil use isn't entirely snake oil, as it turns out. Psychoanalytic psychologists see the unconscious mind as the root of psychological problems. The theory of psychoanalysis was developed by Sigmund Freud. He distinguished between the conscious and the unconscious mind and held the view that the contents of the unconscious mind determine conscious behavior. Freud believed that many of our drives are repressed into the unconscious due to traumatic experiences during childhood. One of the two components of Freud's structure of the psyche are id and ego. Id is the primal part and is driven by pleasure. It seeks immediate gratification without concern for the consequences. The id is unconscious and contains urges like hunger and sexual desire. Ego, on the other hand, operates in reality and is rational. It balances the impulsive demands of the id with social norms and rules. The ego seeks to satisfy id's urges in a way that is socially acceptable. Id and ego fight a constant war because of their conscious values. This, according to Freud, manifests itself in mental disorders. He discovered that these instinctive impulses are expressed most clearly in dreams, although they are oftentimes encoded in symbolisms. They can also manifest in neuroticism and Freudian slips, which are mistakes in speech or action. These aren't speech impediments, but rather unintentional errors in speech, memory, or action, and they occur when hidden or repressed thoughts from the unconscious mind sneak into our conscious behavior. For example, forgetting someone's name could mean that you subconsciously want to distance yourself from that person. The third component, which represents the moral and ethical part of our psyche, is called superego. It acts as an inner critic. It judges the actions and desire of the id and ego based on moral standards. It strives for perfection and is responsible for feelings of guilt and shame. Id, ego, and superego are part of the structural theory of psychoanalysis. This is a detoxification program that is advocated by and practiced by the Church of Scientology. It was developed by its founder, Ron Hubbard, and is used as an introductory service. It involves heat exposure for up to 5 hours per day and can last for 4 weeks or even more. Followers of Scientology believe that purification rundown is the only effective way of dealing with long-term effects of drug use and is also marketed as such by the Church of Scientology. This process works by doing calisthenics, running on treadmills, and staying in a sauna for up to 5 hours per day. The problem is that being exposed to extreme heat and humidity for that long can and often does cause heat stroke damage, brain injury, heart problems, organ failure, and in some cases even death. The cost of the program was apparently $5,200 in 2009, and it was promoted as having benefits such as lowering cholesterol, relieving pain, and improving memory, as well as boosting IQ by up to 15 points. In 1980, Hubbard told his followers that a nuclear war was imminent, and that the program would enable them to deal with nuclear fallout. The theoretical basis of the program is that toxins and drugs are stored in body fat and are released through exchange of fats, which is why the diet that is prescribed involves consumption of oil. Toxicology experts deny this theory because toxins and drugs are actually removed from the body through the liver, kidneys, and lungs. People have sustained injuries from this program, brain damage, and some have even died. The program is not supported by any doctor, and experts have denied the effectiveness of this program. Scientology is a pretty sick cult, which should by no means be taken seriously. An author by the name of Immanuel Velikovsky wrote a book by the name of Worlds in Collision in the year 1950, in which he proposes the idea that Venus was formed inside Jupiter and later, in the 15th century BCE, was ejected from Jupiter as a comet and passed near Earth. This changed the Earth's orbit and axis, which in turn caused countless catastrophes, which are mentioned in early mythologies and religions from around the world. 52 years later, it made a close approach once again, this time stopping the Earth's rotation for a while and causing more catastrophes. There exists a Mesopotamian tablet from around 172 BCE that gives instructions on warding off the evil effects of a lunar eclipse, which were believed to threaten the life of the king. In ancient Greece, the goddess of the moon was named Selene. She had a brother named Helios, who drives his sun chariot across the sky. Selene, on the other hand, drives her chariot across the heavens. Hippocrates, who is the father of medicine, believed that the moon had a strong impact on disease and health. In Vedic astrology, the moon is considered to govern the mind and emotions. All that is to say that the moon was always believed to play a big part on the physical and mental well-being of humans. Let's now discuss the moon's effect on nature. The moon's gravitational pull causes the water to rise, causing high tide. The spawning of the Great Barrier Reef is connected to the moon as well. Billions of coral polyps release their eggs into the sea. The main trigger is the lunar cycle, because the spawning always occurs between October and December, just after a full moon. Barrow's petrel, which is an endangered seabird that breeds on the island of Reunion in the Indian Ocean, times its pre- and post-breeding migration, because they always arrive at the full moon. The moon undeniably has an effect on nature, but does it affect humans? It supposedly disrupts sleeping patterns. The increased light during a full moon interferes with melatonin production, thus disrupting the sleep-wake cycle. The moon's cycle lasts approximately 29.5 days, which is close to the average menstrual cycle length. leading some to believe that the moon influences a woman's biological rhythm. According to the Vedas, the moon is associated with Kapha dosha, which we mentioned earlier. Kapha dosha governs bodily fluids, growth, and immunity, and the moon is said to have an effect on these things. Some believe that the moon does have an effect, others don't. The science agrees with the latter. In around 1909, Albert Adams began claiming that he could detect energy frequencies in his patients' bodies. The idea being that an unhealthy person will possess different frequencies than a healthy one, and that diseases can be diagnosed and treated by applying electromagnetic radiation, for example radio waves, and thus restoring balance to the radio frequencies in the body. In 1961, a Soviet scientist by the name of Nikolai Fedyakin was pushing water through tiny tubes made of quartz. He observed that the water that came out behaved differently from regular water. It had a higher boiling point, a lower freezing point, and was much thicker, similar to syrup. Since the boiling point is much higher, it could be used as a super efficient coolant in power plants, nuclear reactors, or spacecrafts. It could also be used in cryogenics, helping with the preservation of organs without actually freezing them. It could even be used as a fuel or as a way of storing energy. The reason this is considered pseudoscience is because scientific examination proved that what was thought to be polywater was simply contamination in the experiments and that there is no chemical difference compared to normal H2O. In 1908, a mass explosion happened over the Tunguska River in Siberia, flattening around 80 million trees over an area of 2,000 square kilometers or 770 square miles. The Tunguska event is the largest impact in the Earth's recorded history, although much larger explosions did occur in prehistoric times. Airwaves from the Tunguska event reached all the way from Siberia to Europe. The explosion apparently released 1,000 times more energy than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. There were no craters or any significant debris found at the site of the explosion. Since we don't know what caused this, we can only speculate or at best make educated guesses. The most widely accepted theory is that an asteroid or a comet hit the Earth. There is no crater because the comet disintegrated in the air. Another theory is natural gas. Methane and other gases were probably trapped underneath the surface and were ignited, leading to a massive explosion. Then there are speculations and conspiracy theories that the Soviet government conducted tests using nuclear explosions. Once upon a time, the Earth was completely covered by water. We can imagine it as a giant ocean. Neptunism states that all rocks on Earth were formed by the crystallization of minerals that were dissolved in this ancient ocean. This idea was created by a scientist by the name of Abraham Gottlob Werner in the late 1700s. He believed that as time went on, the water would gradually evaporate, which caused dissolved minerals to crystallize and form into solid rock. Plutonism, on the other hand, was conceived by James Hutton at around the same time. His belief was that rock formation happened due to molten magma making its way to the surface and cooling down slowly and solidifying, thus forming a rock which is called igneous rock. One such type of rock is granite. This process can happen through volcanic eruption or when magma slowly cools down underground. Plutonism also states that rocks can form due to tectonic movement. Plutonism is largely considered correct and is accepted in modern geology, while Neptunism slipped into obscurity. Odorology is the practice that uses specially trained dogs to identify human scent. Police use it to establish whether or not someone was at the crime scene. The method is based on the fact that each person has their own unique scent, and the dogs can detect that. The smell of death in this entry probably refers to locating dead bodies. Dogs are trained to detect the scent of decomposing bodies or human remains and locate them, whether it be in forests, lakes, collapsed buildings, or blizzards. There are a few reasons for why odorology isn't considered to be entirely scientific. The first is a lack of standardization, as the training of the dogs varies widely across different countries. Another is called the clever Hans effect. You know the horse who was doing math? It's when an animal is seemingly giving the right answer, but in reality is only picking up on unintentional cues from the handler. There are a few other reasons, but these two are the ones I think are worth mentioning the most. Iridologists claim that they can diagnose health conditions by observing the characteristics of the iris. They rely on an iris chart that divides the iris into zones that correlate to a specific part of the body. During the examination, an iridologist looks for abnormalities in the pigmentation of the irises. Let's say that there is discoloration in the bottom center of the right iris. That would indicate that there is something wrong with your right leg. Gasoline powder or gasoline pill is claimed to turn water into gasoline. It's supposedly part of the suppressed inventions. You drop a pill into water and stir. Reactions take place and the water transforms into liquid fuel. It's an interesting theory that could certainly be incredibly useful if it was widely available. Imagine that instead of transporting fuel, we could instead transport little pills and turn any body of water into gasoline. It would save a lot of money and time. Reiki Gerd Hamer was a German physician who is the originator of Germanic New Medicine, which claims to be able to cure cancer. On the 8th of August 1978, Hamer's son, Dirk, while he was asleep, was shot on a yacht off a small island named Cavallo by Vittorio Emanuele, who was the son of the last king of Italy. Dirk died on December the 7th. Sometime after his son's death, Hamer developed testicular cancer and thought that there was a link between the two events. His testicular cancer is what prompted him to develop Germanic New Medicine, which can be summarized in its 5 biological laws, as they were called. We are going to describe 3 of them, as those are the most interesting ones. The first law is called the Iron Rule. Severe diseases originate from a traumatic event. Unresolved trauma leads to conflict in the body, which is called the active conflict phase. During this phase, a patient will experience cold symptoms such as stress, weight loss, and sleeping disorders. The second law represents the two-phased nature of the disease. If the conflict is resolved, the patient enters a healing phase, where the parasympathetic nervous system takes over. This system controls automatic bodily functions, and the healing phase is associated with warm diseases, such as rheumatic, infectious, or allergic conditions. The third law represents the ontogenetic system of diseases. Hamer proposes that disease progression is mostly controlled by the brain, either by the old brain or the new brain. The old brain controls primitive processes like breathing, eating, and reproduction, and the new brain manages more advanced personal issues such as territorial conflict, separation conflict, and conflicts that have to do with self-devaluation and identity. Hamer then splits the layers of tissue into 3 categories. Tissues from the endoderm layer are controlled by the old brain. Conflicts here can lead to tumor growth. Tissues from the mesoderm can be controlled by both brains. If these conflicts arise in the active conflict phase, they can cause tissue growth, which can again lead to tumors. On the other hand, it can also cause tissue loss, which causes necrosis and ulcers. Lastly, tissues from the ectoderm layer are managed by the new brain and result in tissue functioning impairments during the active phase, followed by replenishment of damaged tissues in the healing phase. So, according to Hamer, diseases don't actually exist. Instead, what we call a disease is actually just a natural response to emotional issues. Germs like bacteria and viruses help the body heal, and the key to curing a disease is resolving the emotional conflict. Every language originates from Turkish, according to this theory. Not exactly Turkish, but the Proto-Turkic primal language. The theory states that all languages can be traced back to Turkish and share a common linguistic ancestry with it. Ancient civilizations like the Sumerians and Egyptians spoke an early form of Turkish. I don't think we have to go into why this isn't true. Stonehenge, Easter Island, the Karnak stones, and Göbekli Tepe. Humans in the past have constructed some incredible monuments. Stonehenge is aligned with the summer and winter solstices. On the summer solstice, when the day is the longest and the night is the shortest, the sun rises directly above the heel stone. There are 2 types of stones in Stonehenge. The large ones are called the sarsen stones and weigh from 20 to 30 pounds. They were transported from the Marlborough Downs, which are located 40 kilometers or 25 miles north of Stonehenge. A few theories about their transportation are that they were dragged on wooden sleds. This was done by applying grease on the surface underneath the sleds. The other is water transportation via rivers and flooded areas. On the conspiratorial side, some believe that there was extraterrestrial assistance. Another is levitation through sound and magnetism. Lastly, a more grounded theory is that these stones were not moved by beings at all, but by glaciers during the Ice Age. Large glaciers carried these stones from Wales to the Salisbury Plains, and ancient humans only had to move them a short distance. The supporting evidence is the fact that glaciers have moved large rocks over long distances before. This is called glacial till, which is the material left behind by a retreating glacier. It can be anything from pebbles to gigantic rocks. The other type of stones that are at Stonehenge are the smaller ones, called bluestones. They weigh 2 to 4 tons and were sourced from Preseli Hills in Wales, which is around 240 kilometers or 150 miles away. The theories regarding their transportation are the same. Let's now look at Easter Island and the Moai statues. Their average size is 4 meters or 13 feet. The largest stands at 10 meters or 32 feet and weighs 82 tons. An unfinished statue known as El Gigante stands at a mind-boggling 21 meters or 72 feet and weighs around 150 tons. There are around 890 Moai statues throughout Easter Island. Many unfinished ones are at the quarry of Ranora Rock, where most of them were carved. About 288 statues were moved to Ahu Tongariki, which are the ceremonial platforms around the island. There are large stone platforms that serve as ceremonial centers. Each Ahu was associated with the family group or a clan. These platforms served as burial sites for leaders and chiefs. The accepted theory is that they represented deified ancestors. The Rapa Nui people believed that their chiefs could watch over them and protect them through the statues. They were a symbol of power and authority, and were believed to embody mana, which is a life force that brings prosperity. The mana was activated when the statue received its coral eyes. Then there's the site of Ahu Akiwi. This one faces out to sea instead of inlands. The 7 Moai at this Ahu are said to align with the sunset during the spring equinox and the sunrise during the autumn equinox. They could have been used as a form of timekeeping, like a sort of calendar. Let's now focus on their transportation. The accepted theories are that they were moved on sleds or logs, and that they were pulled by large groups of people using ropes. The most widely accepted is the walking theory. It says that the Moai were walked using ropes, which were pulled by people on each side, creating a sort of rocking motion, making it appear as if the statue is walking. Another theory that has spread through oral history is that natives possessed certain divine powers to command the statues to walk. The earliest accounts say that a king named Tuku Ihu moved them with the help of the god Make Make, who is the creator of humanity in the Rapa Nui religion. Another interesting theory is that many of the Moai were originally carved with full bodies. The larger statues could have weighed at around 200 tons in their full construction. We mentioned just 2 of the megaliths. There are many more, and the geometry and connection to celestial objects is fascinating. What makes these theories interesting is that we cannot know for certain how these structures were constructed and transported, leaving a lot of room for interpretations and conspiracy theories. Vaimanika Shastra is the supposed ancient Indian text about the science of aeronautics. It was published in around 1918 and is claimed to be a 7,000-year-old ancient Indian script. It is a sort of manual for aircraft building and claims to contain ancient knowledge about aircrafts, which are called Vimanas. These machines were noiseless and could move in all directions. These crafts were flown by a man known as Shivkur Bapuji Talpade, who was a Sanskrit scholar who had used this knowledge of the Vedas and aircraft making to fly the first aircraft in the year 1895 at the Chopati beach, quite a few years before the Wright brothers, making him the first man to fly. One of the Vimanas is the Rukma Vimana, Rukma meaning gold in Sanskrit. It had long vertical ducts with fans, which acted as generators of thrust. It could apparently reach the speed of up to 721 miles per hour, which is almost 1200 kilometers per hour. It could generate smoke in order to make itself invisible. It could fly in all 4 directions, and it harnessed atmospheric energy. Before we delve into autodynamics, we have to explain the Lorentz transformation. This is a set of equations that tells us how things like time, space, and energy behave when objects move close to the speed of light. Don't be confused by the word transformation in the name. these particles do not transform. It's called this way because it transforms measurements between different viewpoints. The Lorentz transformation essentially explains why time seems to move slower or objects seem to contract when moving at high speeds. It's like the famous thought experiment that goes like this. Imagine you stayed on Earth and your dad went to space and traveled at the speed of light for X amount of years. When he returned, you would be older than him because time moved a lot slower for him since he was traveling at the speed of light. Now onto our entry. Autodynamics was conceived by Riccardo Charezani, an Argentinian physicist born in 1921, and it claims that the Lorentz transformation is wrong. This would mean that the theory of time slowing down at high speeds isn't true. Without the Lorentz transformation, we also need a new way to explain gravity. Autodynamics claims that gravity is a particle, called a graviton. Since this is a particle, it could in theory be manipulated with. We could control gravity and alter gravitational fields. We could produce gravitational propulsion systems that would allow us to move through space a lot more efficiently. In conclusion, autodynamics is an objection to Einstein's theory of relativity and isn't accepted by science. It's also very obscure. Finding this info has been very hard, since this is an incredibly fringe theory. Do you remember when we mentioned Lamarckism a bit earlier, the theory that states that physical traits can be passed down through genes? Lysenkoism was promoted by a Soviet agronomist called Trofim Lysenko, who was a big fan of Lamarckism. His ideas emerged as a result of the agricultural crisis that plagued the Soviet Union. The state forcefully bought small individual farms with the intent of converting them into state-controlled collectives. This led to many negative consequences. The farmers that owned 8 or more acres of land were removed from their farms and persecuted, which led to a shortage of experienced farmers. This led to widespread famines throughout the Soviet Union. This is where the following theory comes in. Lysenkoism played a role in further worsening the agricultural crisis. Lysenko promoted agricultural techniques based on his pseudoscientific beliefs. He claimed that exposing seeds to cold temperatures before planting them would make them more resistant to cold and yield higher crop. He also claimed that planting crops of the same sort close to one another would maximize yield. Lysenkoism became a political campaign and was widely promoted in the Soviet Union. What this essentially led to was the dismissal or outright imprisonment of around 3,000 biologists and the execution of many Soviet scientists that were opposing the state, not to mention the continued famines. Lysenkoism eventually died out, but it left a lot of damage on the countries of the Soviet Union. According to an ancient Indian system of medicine called Ayurveda, the tongue is connected to various organs such as the kidneys, heart, lungs, small intestine, and the spine. Oil pulling, which is the practice of swishing oil in the mouth, just like mouthwash, is believed to help rid the body of toxins through the salivary enzymes in the tongue. The oils that are recommended are sunflower, sesame, and coconut oil. Following the Civil War, the Homestead Act, which was signed into law by Abraham Lincoln in 1862, aimed to promote settling to the western parts of America. The act provided 160 acres of public land to settlers for a very low fee, with the aim of increasing population in the Great Plains and boosting agriculture. The landscape of the Great Plains was barren and dry. However, once they began farming and cultivating it, they noticed that the land that was once dry appeared to be flourishing with crops. They also saw an increase in rainfall, leading them to believe that rain followed them and their plows. The transformation of the land, however, was mostly attributed to the farming practices and changes in the rainfall patterns. In short, the rain was nothing more than a coincidence, because the area later went back to being barren and dry. Granite is the rock that forms when magma slowly cools and solidifies. However, the theory of granitization states that granite can be produced as opposed to it only being found in nature. The current accepted theory is that granite forms slowly over a period of millions of years. This entry is pretty mundane compared to other entries on this iceberg that hint at the existence of grand conspiracies or hidden truths. It essentially states that granite can be produced artificially through the process of granitization. Until the modern understanding of dentistry, people believed that the cause of toothaches were worms that were hidden inside the tooth. This idea dates all the way back to Babylon, where it was believed that the toothworm drinks the blood and eats the roots of the teeth, causing caries and rotting of the teeth. This has been the Pseudosciences Iceberg. If you're looking for some other videos to distract yourself with, you can check out my Psychology Iceberg. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your day.